The storm had been gathering since late afternoon, rolling over the Mogayon foothills like a slow-moving herd. By sundown, the sky had taken on the color of hammered iron, and the wind swept down the canyon in long, mournful drafts. Rook paused beside the woodpile, sensing the air thicken, heavy swollen, as if the whole land held its breath. He had spent most of the day circling the ridges, searching for any trace of Nira and Sila, his mother and little sister. They had left nearly a week earlier to seek the last remaining kin of their scattered people. He'd warned them not to travel through the low country where the thickets narrowed and old cavalry trails cut too close to the white men's ranches. But necessity carved its own path. They had not returned, and that silence pressed harder on him than the storm clouds brooding overhead. Darkness fell quick. Rook hauled the final armful of wood toward the cabin when a faint scuff, barely more than a whisper, reached his ear from the horse shed. He froze. Out here, any sound after sundown meant trouble. The horses were penned in the corral tonight because the shed roof leaked on the west side. He hadn't used that shed for months. No one had any business being inside. Setting down the wood, he moved toward the noise with the quiet instinct his people had honed from generations, hunting along dry creek beds. The wind tore at his braid and tugged the lantern flame sideways. Then the soft rustle came again from the far side of the shed wall. A boot sliding. A body shifting. He pushed the door open with the flat of his palm. The lantern's glow cut a narrow gold blade through the dust sweeping across sagging rafters and piles of hay. For a heartbeat, nothing stirred. Then a sudden tremor of movement behind the hay bales made him lift the lantern higher. Two women huddled there. His breath tightened. One was young, not more than 20 by his guess. Her pale face streaked with mud and blood. Her dress was torn at the hem as if she'd taken a hard fall. The other slumped against her older gray-threaded hair, plastered to her brow. Both shivered uncontrollably. They were soaked through from the storm now, spitting cold rain across the valley. When the younger woman saw him, her eyes widened. She reached for something in her skirts, perhaps a small knife. Perhaps nothing at all, but her hand trembled too violently to pose any threat. "Please," she whispered, voice raw, "don't hurt us." Rook didn't answer immediately. In the lantern light, he could see they were half-starved, half-frozen fear carved deep into their bones. Their boots were scraped raw, the soles crusted with the reddish dust found only along the lower hunting trails near the old army road. Something ugly had driven them here. "What are you doing on my land?" he asked at last, his voice low but steady. The young woman swallowed. We didn't know it was yours. We didn't know where we were." She glanced to the older woman, brushing a shaking hand across her cheek. "My mother's hurt badly. We just needed a place to hide someplace out of the rain." Rook stepped closer, slow and cautious. He saw the bruises along the older woman's arms, dark, rounded marks, the kind left by hands that grabbed too hard. He'd seen those same marks on Nira during the hard years when cavalry scouts pressed too close. "Who did this to you?" he asked. "Men," she murmured. "Men with rifles. They thought we were helping someone. I don't know who. They shouted at us to stop, then fired." She clenched her jaw. "We ran after that, lost our horse, got turned around in the woods, weak." Her voice cracked. "We didn't mean to trespass." Rook studied them in silence. Two white women showing up on his doorstep in the middle of a storm was strange enough. Showing up bruised, barefoot, terrified, that meant something worse. Something dangerous was slipping through the valley. The wind shoved the shed door, rattling the tin roof. The older woman moaned softly, her eyelids fluttering. "She needs warmth," Rook said, "and water." He motioned toward the cabin on the hill. The younger woman hesitated, eyes shifting from him to the open night. "You're Apache," she said, not with contempt, but with the wary knowing of someone who understood what her own people had done. "Yes," he answered simply. She exhaled shakily. My name is Lysa Karen. My mother is Mara Karen. We're not armed. We're not. Her voice wavered. We're not trouble. He held her gaze a long moment. Her fear was real. So was her honesty. Come, he said. Bring your mother. She tried to lift Mara, but staggered under her weight. Without a word, Rook stepped forward and gathered the older woman carefully into his arms. She was light, far too light, and her fever burned hot against his chest. Lysa Karen followed close behind, shivering as the storm gathered strength. They reached the cabin just as the sky split open and sheets of cold rain swept across the valley. Rook pushed the door wide, letting the scent of wood smoke and sage roll out to greet them. Inside he laid Mara Karen near the hearth and pulled a buffalo robe over her, while Lysa knelt beside her, whispering soft words meant to steady the trembling. Rook moved in silence, feeding the fire heating water, crushing rabbit brush leaves and dried yarrow for a poultice. He handed the warm cloth to Lysa, who pressed it gently to her mother's temple. Firelight flickered across her face, revealing exhaustion, fear, and something else she tried hard to hide. Gratitude, though, she fought not to show it. For a long while the only sound was the storm hammering the cabin walls and the fire snapping inside the grate. At last Lysa spoke. You saved us. He didn't answer. He sat on the far side of the firearms, resting on his knees, watching the storm claw at the darkness beyond the window. Truth was, he wasn't thinking about her thanks. His mind lingered on the thorn thickets, the cliff trails, the place where Nira and Sela had vanished without a trace. If trouble had found these two women, then danger roamed closer than he feared, and he meant to learn why. The storm eased by morning, leaving the valley soaked and gleaming beneath a pale silver sky. A thin ribbon of steam drifted from the wet earth, and the scent of juniper hung in the cool dawn shadows. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, but enough warmth clung to the room to hold the chill at bay. Rook rose before first light, the habit of a man who had spent half his life watching for danger in the hours when the world was only half awake. He checked the horses, then walked the yard's perimeter, crouching to study the ground. Fresh tracks marked the mud boot prints, not moccasins, deep prints left by men riding hard and heavy. They had passed through, sometime in the night, close, too close. He straightened slowly, jaw tight. If the men hunting those women had crossed his land, once they'd cross it again. When he stepped back into the cabin, Lysa was awake, sitting beside her mother. Mara slept fitfully, a bead of sweat clinging to her brow, despite the cool morning air. Lysa had managed to clean her up some, yet she still looked worn thin, as if held together by sheer will. You're up early, she murmured. Storm woke me, he lied. She didn't challenge it. Her eyes held a softness touched by caution, the look of someone caught between two worlds and unsure where she belonged. How is she? He asked, nodding toward Mara. Fever's gone down some, Lysa said, but her leg's swollen. I think it's worse than I thought. Rook stepped closer and knelt to look. Beneath the blankets, the calf was red and inflamed. The skin stretched tight with infection. That hadn't come from a fall, it came from whatever those men had done before. He exhaled slowly. I can help her, but she needs rest. And you need food. Lysa gave a faint, embarrassed smile. We haven't eaten since yesterday morning. He lifted the kettle and warmed the last of last night's stew, deer meat, beans, onions, but its rich smell filled the room with a comfort that sank deep. Lysa cupped the bowl with both hands, steam softening her face. You should eat too, she said. I already did. It was true he'd eaten outside before searching the tracks. He didn't add that his worry had kept him from swallowing much. While she ate, Rook mixed herbs from a small pouch ground. Osha root, dried willow bark. He filled a cup with hot water, stirring until the mixture clouded the surface. For her fever, he said, passing it to her. Lysa sniffed it cautiously. It smells bitter. It is, but it works. She smiled despite her exhaustion. Small price, really. Thank you. He nodded once, uncertain how to handle the warmth her voice stirred in him. Gratitude from white settlers was rare, or sincere gratitude rarer still. He turned away before she noticed the shift in his expression. Outside, the sky brightened to a weak blue. Birds returned to the mesquite branches, shaking off the rain and calling to each other, as if the world had been washed clean. But Rook felt no ease. Those boot tracks, those men. They didn't wander this far into Apache land without reason, and the timing was too sharp to ignore. First Nira and Sela vanished. Then these two women were hunted, both near the old cavalry road, both near hills where Apache families once lived before being driven out. Something tied it all together. He just didn't know what. Lysa finished the stew and gently touched her mother's hand. She needs a doctor, she whispered. There's one in Silver Mesa, she added, but it's half a day's ride. And we don't have a horse anymore. And the men who hurt you, Rook said, ride that same road. Rook said nothing at first, and Lysa Karen lifted her eyes to him, fear flickering behind the resolve she was trying to hold steady. Then what do we do? She asked. For a long moment Rook didn't answer. He paced the room once, twice, breathing in the thick scent of wood smoke and old timber. At last he spoke. You stay here at least until she can stand. Lysa blinked. We don't want to impose. You're not imposing. His voice came out sharper than he meant, and he took a breath to ease it. You're in danger, and my land is safer than the open road. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. He pulled on his coat. I'm going to look around. Riders came through in the night. I need to know how many. Lysa stiffened. You think they're close enough to smell the smoke from my fire. He stepped toward the door, but her voice stopped him. Rook. He turned. Lysa looked suddenly smaller, her shoulders drawn tight, though something steady still burned in her eyes. Why are they after us? She asked. We didn't do anything. They said we were helping someone, but I don't know who they meant. Rook studied her face, the raw honesty, the fear she fought to hide, and beneath it all, a weight he couldn't yet place. They weren't after you, he said quietly. They were hunting someone else. The truth hit her, slow like cold water running down her spine. Your people, she whispered. They thought we knew something. He didn't deny it. Lysa lowered her gaze, twisting her fingers into her skirt. My husband. He was part of the cavalry. 3rd Regiment. She swallowed. They rode through this valley once. I'm not proud of that. Rook's jaw tightened, old hurt rising, but he forced the breath out slow. That was his doing, he said, not yours. She looked up surprised. He opened the door, letting a wash of cool morning light spill into the room. Rest, he said. Both of you. I'll be back before noon. Then he stepped outside and let the door fall shut behind him. The wind brushed past him, cool and sharp. He scanned the ridges, the wet earth, the cottonwoods stretching far across the valley. Somewhere out there lay answers. Somewhere out there rode the men who had harmed these women. And tangled in that same danger was the truth about Nira and Sela. Rook tightened his grip on the reins of the nearest mare. By dusk he meant to find it. By the time Rook returned, the sun had slipped behind the ridge, leaving only a faint red streak stretched thin along the horizon. The land smelled of wet dust and creosote. The horses blew warm breath into the cooling air. His boots were heavy with mud, his muscles tight from hours of riding, but his thoughts churned darker than the storm that had passed. He had found more tracks, too many. 6 horses, all shod, all belonging to riders who cared nothing for stealth. They had crossed his land again, heading south toward the wash. Worse still, he had found the remains of a campfire no more than half a mile from his cabin. Whoever these men were, they were bold enough to camp on Apache soil, bold or desperate. He tied the mare to the post, wiped mud from his hands, and stepped into the cabin. Lysa sat near the hearth, tending Mara Karen's swollen leg. Mara slept, her breath shallow and uneven. Lysa looked up as he entered, her face pale with exhaustion, but alert. In that stubborn way he was beginning to understand. "You're back," she said softly. "I am." She rose, rubbing her arms against the cold. "Did you find anything?" Rook hesitated. How much should he tell her? How much should he keep to himself? She carried enough fear already. "Tracks," he said. "6 men. They're close." Color drained from her cheeks. "The same ones," he nodded. Her hands twisted into her skirt. "Do they know we're here?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But they're searching for someone and they think you're tied to it. That makes this place dangerous." Lysa stared into the fire, her thoughts flickering like the flames. "My mother can't travel," she whispered. "If they come here, she couldn't finish." He stepped closer, choosing his words with care. "If they come, I will deal with them." Her gaze met his. Something passed between them, fear, trust, uncertainty, gratitude, all tangled in the fading light. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Outside, the first stars pierced the navy sky. Rook went to check the shutters, sliding the wooden bar across the one on the east wall. "You should rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." But Lysa Karen didn't lie down. Instead, she drifted toward the small window and stood there, staring into the thickening dark. "I've lived on this land for years," she murmured, "and I've never been afraid of the night. My father used to say the darkness was just another part of God's canvas, nothing more." She swallowed. "But tonight feels different." Rook studied her for a long moment. "Fear doesn't make you weak," he said quietly. "It only proves you're still alive." She let out a shaky, breathless laugh, half humor, half despair. "Then I'm very alive." He almost smiled, almost. Hours stretched on. Mara Karan drifted in and out of restless sleep, muttering broken fragments through her fever. Lysa sat beside her head, bobbing forward until Rook coaxed her to lie down on the pallet he laid by the fire. She resisted, of course. She seemed built for resisting, but exhaustion eventually dragged her under, and she settled beneath the woven blanket with a sigh pulled from the center of her tired soul. When her breathing steadied, Rook took a stool near the door rifle within easy reach. The fire cracked softly. Coyotes called across the ridge. Cottonwoods rustled like hushed warnings in the dark. He dozed lightly, never fully asleep. The first knock was soft. He thought he'd dreamed it until the second knock rattled the door hard. He was on his feet before the echo faded. Lysa jerked awake, eyes wide. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a scream. Mara stirred, whispering her daughter's name, confused. "Stay back," Rook murmured, as he reached for his rifle. The third knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a hammering blow, a fist slamming against the wood with the force of a man who didn't believe in asking permission. "Rook," a rough voice called through the night. "We know you're in there." Lysa froze, hands trembling at her sides. "It's them," she whispered. He motioned her behind the table. "Stay low." Another voice chimed in. "Open the door, Apache. We just want to talk." The fake friendliness in that tone made Rook's stomach twist. These weren't men who talked. They were hunters of people, of chances, of anything that lined their pockets. He moved close enough to speak through the door. "What do you want?" A pause. "Then 2 women crossed your valley yesterday. We tracked them to this ridge. They're fugitives. They need to come with us." Rook's jaw flexed. "They're injured." "That ain't our problem," the man barked. Mara moaned. Lysa clapped a hand over her mother's mouth and whispered useless comfort, her own voice shaking too hard to soothe anything. Boots shifted outside, impatient. The men weren't leaving. Rook's muscles coiled. He had no intention of giving Lysa or her mother to these men, not after what they'd endured. Not now, not ever. But before he could answer, one of the men called out something that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. "We heard you got a couple of Apache women too," the man drawled. "Old and young." We'll take 'em off your hands while we're at it." Rook went still as carved stone. His mother, his sister. He stepped closer to the door, voice dropping to something dark as rolling thunder. "You speak lies." "Do I?" The man taunted. "Saw tracks 2 smaller feet, looked like women's, looked like they went right toward your land." Lysa's breath hitched. The air inside the cabin changed sharp, tense electric. Rook lowered the barrel of his rifle, not surrendering, but settling into the cold, measured calm of a man deciding exactly how much force he was about to unleash. "Leave," he said, each word a beat. A cruel laugh followed, not without the women. The pounding resumed harder now, shaking the frame of the cabin. Mara whimpered. Lysa pressed herself against her mother, eyes wide pleading without a voice, and Rook moved toward the door, his shoulders squared. A hunter's silence wrapped around him like a cloak. Whatever waited outside, whatever danger gathered like storm clouds, once again he had chosen his side. Tonight, no one would take these women from his home, not while breath stayed in his chest. The pounding stopped so suddenly, the silence roared. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Even the fire shrank back, crackling in quiet warning. Lysa held her breath. Mara clung weakly to her daughter's sleeve, and Rook stood inches from the door, tall and unmoving, the way a mountain stands in the middle of a storm. Then boots scraped outside. Low voices muttered. Someone cursed. Someone escaped. "They're gonna make this difficult," one of the men growled. Rook didn't look at Lysa Karen when he said, "Stay here." It wasn't a request. Yet she rose halfway to her feet, trembling. "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The set of his shoulders told her more than any words could. She grabbed his arm before fear could stop her. "Rook, please." "My mother, she can't move fast. If they get inside." He turned to her, and though his face held the carved calm of a man ready for a fight, his voice dropped low, gentle, steady. "I won't let them touch either of you." Her grip eased just enough for him to pull free. Outside, shadows shifted. A figure passed the window. Another crept along the cabin wall. The crunch of wet gravel cut through the silence. Lysa's heartbeat climbed into her throat. Rook reached for the latch. "Don't," she choked out. But he opened the door anyway. Cold night air rushed in sharp as cut glass. 4 men stood in the clearing, leaning on rifles, revolvers, strapped high on their hips, coats still wet from their ride. Their horses stomped in the dark, snorting steam into the chill. The tallest of the men stepped forward, a smirk slicing across his face. "Well, now," he drawled, "thought you'd come to your senses." Rook didn't step out, but he didn't step back either. He stood framed in the doorway, as if the cabin itself depended on his presence to stay upright. "You crossed my land without permission," he said. His voice held a quiet that made Lysa's skin prickle. "You hunted on it, threatened people under my roof. You'll leave." "That ain't your call," the tall man replied, spreading his hands. "Law says any man can track a fugitive." Lysa clenched her fists. "We're not fugitives." The men ignored her. The tall man shrugged. "Girl, maybe you don't know what your kin's been up to." Lysa's pulse spiked. "My mother is sick because of you. Funny how folks remember things differently," he said with a crooked grin. Rook stepped forward just enough that the lantern light caught the hard line of his cheekbone, half fire, half shadow. "They stay here." The tall man let out a low, mocking whistle. Bold words from a redskin on the wrong side of history. A shift moved through Rook's body, subtle, deadly. Not rage, not fear. Decision. Lysa pressed a hand to her mouth. She could feel the storm inside him tightening, ready to break. The tall man tilted his head. "Tell you what, give us the women and nobody gets hurt." "No." Another man cocked his rifle. "You think you can stop 6 of us?" Rook lifted his chin. "You want a fight. You won't like what you find." Something in his voice, something old and canyon deep, made the men falter. Then a cry cut through the night. "Rook!" Everyone turned. Two figures appeared at the edge of the clearing, stumbling down the narrow trail between the rocks. Lantern light caught a shawl, long gray hair whipping in the wind. Beside her, a younger woman leaned heavily on her arm. Lysa's eyes flew wide. She recognized the resemblance faces shaped by the same long-suffering determination. Rook's mother, Nira, and his sister, Sila, alive. His breath punched from his chest in a stunned gasp. "Mother!" The tall man barked a laugh. "Well, hell, looks like we tracked the right place after all." The ground seemed to twist beneath Lysa's feet. The men weren't after her or Mara Karen anymore. They wanted Nira and Sila. Mara whimpered behind her. Nira stumbled closer. "The spirits guided us," she said breathlessly. "We heard riders. We hid until they passed." Her voice cracked. "Son, they were searching everywhere." Before Rook could speak, Sila pointed at the men. Those are the ones." The tall man's smile died. His hand drifted toward his revolver. Lysa didn't think she simply moved. "No," she shouted, stepping into the doorway beside Rook before fear could drag her back down. Rook shot her a look half warning, half disbelief. But she stood her ground. "You leave them alone," Lysa said, voice trembling but fierce. "They're not going anywhere with you." "None of us are," Lysa Karen said. A few of the men chuckled. The tall one didn't. "That's mighty brave for a widow out here in Apache country," he drawled. "Does your dead husband know you've taken up with his enemies?" The words hit like a blow. Rook saw it in the way Lysa's shoulders tightened, the sudden flicker in her eyes. He stepped forward, blocking her from their view. "My people," Rook said, voice low, "are not your prey." The tall man sneered. "Maybe not, but you're outnumbered redskin, and you're harboring fugitives. Folks'll say you attacked us first, Nira." His mother spoke, then her voice small but sharp. "We have done nothing wrong. That ain't ever mattered," the tall man replied. He lifted his revolver. Lysa gasped. Rook didn't hesitate. Like a hawk striking from the cliffs, he slammed the door shut and threw the wooden bar across it. A gunshot cracked the night. The bullet thudded into the thick door, right where his head had been a heartbeat before. Mara screamed. Lysa dragged her mother behind the table, shielding her as best she could. Outside men cursed and shouted. Inside, Rook grabbed his rifle and pressed his shoulder to the wall. Lysa stared at him, heart pounding so fiercely it drowned the chaos outside. "What do we do?" she whispered. He met her gaze steady, unbroken. "We protect this house," he said, "together." And somewhere beneath the fear, Lysa felt something spark. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belief. Gunfire did not follow, not immediately. For a long suspended moment after the shot hit the door, the world outside went unnervingly still. The men muttered among themselves, boots scraping wet earth, horses shifting uneasily. But they didn't charge. Not yet. Inside, Mara clung to Lysa's hand, trembling. Sila eased down beside them, whispering soft words and Apache words that carried steadiness even through fear. Nira stood near the hearth, one hand gripping the brickwork, the other curled around the small charm at her neck. Rook checked the rifle, running a finger along the stock with calm, precise care. "They're deciding," he murmured, "whether to fight or wait us out." "Wait us out," Lysa whispered sharply. "That could be all night." He nodded once. "They believe they have time." The weight of that truth settled in Lysa's chest like cold ash. "What will they do?" she asked. "Men like that," Rook said, eyes never leaving the door, "whatever brings them coin." Silence fell again, heavy, suffocating. Mara's fevered breathing felt too loud, too fragile in the small room. The cabin itself seemed to shrink as if it sensed the danger pressing against its walls. Rook moved to the window, peering through a narrow crack in the shutter. Lysa followed, staying just behind his shoulder. 4 men still stood outside. The tall leader, Drax Holden, though she didn't yet know the name, barked orders as he pointed toward the brush and the slope near the creek bed. They were spreading out, circling. "They're setting positions," Rook said quietly. Her hands balled into fists. "Why you told them to leave? That kind of man doesn't listen to words he said, only to advantage." "And do we have one?" she asked. For the first time since the knocking began, he turned to her fully. Lantern light warmed the strong edges of his face, his sharply cut cheekbones, the firm line of his jaw, eyes dark as the storm that had passed. "No," he said plainly. "But we have something better. We have something worth defending." Lisa's breath caught. She didn't know if he meant Mara Nira Sela, or her. Maybe all of them. Minutes crept by. The men outside kept their distant voices drifting faintly through the cold night. Twice someone approached the door, testing it. Both times Rook leveled his rifle toward the sound until they backed off. Still no gunshot followed. Lysa's shoulders eased slightly. "Maybe they'll leave," she whispered. Rook shook his head. "They're waiting for dawn, for better aim for our exhaustion." He turned from the window and knelt beside his mother and sister, speaking soft words in Apache. Nira answered and touched his forehead gently. Sela glanced at Lysa, offered a small, brave smile, then passed her a cup of water. They drank in short, careful sips. Lysa eased beside them. "Are you hurt?" she asked Nira. Nira smiled faintly, the expression soft and worn at the edges. "Only tired, child. The world has chased us a long time." There was wisdom in her eyes. Old sorrow, too, but nothing sharp, nothing bitter. Something warm stirred in Lysa Karen's chest, unexpected and steady. "You found each other," she said softly. "I'm glad." Nira studied her for a long, thoughtful moment. "You're kind," she said. "Too kind for a land that eats kindness alive." She reached out and gently patted Lysa's hand. "My son chose well to stand with you." The words struck Lysa like a spark from dry brush. Hot, bright, startling. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she glanced instinctively toward Rook, who remained focused on the threat outside, unaware of the wildfire he'd lit inside her. Hours crept by, slow and heavy. The fire sank low, and Rook fed it only small pieces, just enough to keep the room warm, without spilling too much light through the cracks. Lysa leaned against the wall, her bones aching with exhaustion. Mara Karen's fever eased little by little. Her breathing steadied. Sela slept curled beneath the buffalo robe. Nira dozed in brief, broken moments. Only Rook stayed upright. He shifted and sat beside Lysa, resting his rifle across his lap. He didn't touch her or look at her at first, but his presence wrapped around her like a quiet shield. "You should rest," he murmured. She shook her head. "Not while those men are outside. You're exhausted." "So are you." His lips twitched. "I can stay awake. So can I." He finally turned his head, really looked at her, and something in the air tightened, warm and delicate. "You're brave," he said, voice low. "No," she whispered back. "I'm scared. Very scared." Being scared isn't the opposite of bravery. The truth in his voice unraveled something inside her. She released a trembling breath, pressing a hand over her mouth to steady it. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For choosing our side." He didn't answer. But his grip tightened on the rifle stock, a small movement, protective, almost tender. Close to midnight, the men outside grew restless. Boots paced the clearing, voices muttered curses. Horses snorted in agitation. The tall leader, Drax Holden, barked. "We ain't waiting much longer. They gotta come out sometime." "Should we rush the door?" another asked. "No," someone replied. "He's expecting that." A pause. "Then we'll smoke 'em out." Lysa felt the blood drain from her face. Rook's expression hardened. They'll try to funnel smoke through the roof seams under the door. Mara stirred weakly, whispering Lysa's name. We can't stay in here, Lysa said. If she breathes smoke, I know. He paced once, thinking fast. Lysa watched him with her heart in her throat, knowing he was searching for a path none of them could yet see. Nira rose, then leaning on Lysa's arm. Her voice in Apache was low but steady. Son, we must move before they corner us like animals. We can't outrun them, Rook said, but we can outthink them. He met his mother's gaze, then slowly. His eyes drifted toward the back of the cabin, toward the narrow exit leading to the storage lean-to, and beyond it the rocky slope descending toward the dry wash. A plan began to take shape. He turned to Lysa. When I say run, he told her, you go with my mother and sister. Down the wash. Stay low. Stay quiet. And you. Lysa's voice cracked. He glanced toward the door, where shadows moved like wolves circling. I'll hold them off. Her heart twisted painfully. You'll be killed. Maybe he said simply, but not before you're safe. The world seemed to narrow to the fire's dim glow, the trembling cabin walls, the heavy breaths of fear and hope. Lysa stepped forward and grabbed his sleeve. I don't want to leave you behind. His eyes softened, barely warm enough to steady her, strong enough to break her. You won't, he murmured. A beat. Then, quiet as a vow, I will find you again. And before the men outside lit their torches, she believed him. The first torch flared outside orange light, licking up the pitch-soaked cloth. The men shouted to one another, emboldened by fire, like wolves gone wild with hunger. But they weren't expecting the back wall of the cabin to open. Rook lifted the latch on the lean-to and eased it outward. Cold night air surged in, carrying juniper, wet earth, and danger. Lysa's heart hammered as she helped steady Nira. Sela clutched Mara, trying to lift her gently, but Mara was too weak. How do we get her out? Lysa asked, panic rising. Rook didn't hesitate. He lifted Mara Karen as if she weighed no more than a sleeping child, careful not to stir the fever in her body. She gasped softly, but his grip stayed firm, steady. Stay close, he whispered. Keep your heads low. Lysa Karen nodded, though her knees trembled so hard she feared they might give out before she took a single step. Outside, the torches hissed louder. Men were shifting toward the cabin's front door. Rook moved first, slipping into the darkness like he was cut from it. His mother and sister followed. Then Lysa, keeping one hand on the hem of his coat so she wouldn't lose him in the shadows. They crept past the woodpile, the wind carrying the burnt tang of torch smoke. A shout rang out behind them. Hey, someone's moving out back. Circle around, don't let him run. Rook cursed under his breath. Go, he hissed. Down the slope, Lysa's breath hitched. What about you, Kay? He lowered Mara Karen carefully onto Sila's waiting shoulder, then met Lysa's eyes in the dark, his hand gripping her elbow for one heartbeat that felt like a lifetime. I will lead them away. No Rook. But he was already moving, darting between mesquite bushes, kicking up enough noise to draw attention. Over there, a man yelled. I saw him, gunfire cracked through the air, sharp and vicious. Torches bucked wildly as the men scrambled after him. Lysa clapped both hands over her mouth to hold back a scream. Nira rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. Come, child. He knows these hills. He will not fall tonight. Truth or comfort? Lysa didn't know, but she followed. They slid down the rocky slope on legs stiff with cold and fear gravel skittering under their boots. The dry wash gaped below them like a dark ribbon. Once they reached the bottom, the ground leveled. Sela pulled Mara along with quick, practiced urgency. Lysa stayed close, steadying the older woman's weight. The night stretched long, full of shouts, snapping branches, and distant hoofbeats. Lysa prayed with every breath, prayed harder than she had since childhood, kneeling beside her father's chair. At last the sounds faded. The hills swallowed everything. Only the cold remained. They reached Silver Mesa just after dawn. The town stared at them, disheveled, exhausted, coated in dust and fear. Guilt sat heavy in Lysa's chest. She didn't want to explain, not to these people. The town had never been kind to her. They tolerated her husband. They did not tolerate her widowhood. Some muttered as she passed, "Traveling with Indians now. Look what she dragged in. She's bringing trouble." Lysa ignored them. She helped her mother into the doctor's office near the center of town. Elric Shaw was a stern man with sharp angles in his face, but he took Mara in without question. "She's got a fever and some bruising, but she'll live," he said at last, wiping his hands. "She needs rest, warmth, and no more running about." Lysa sagged relief shuddering through her. Nira reached for her hand. "You saved her." "No," Lysa whispered, voice breaking. "He did, but Rook wasn't there. Not yet." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Lysa paced the porch outside the doctor's office, nerves twisted tight. Every noise, every hoofbeat snapped her head up. Then near mid-morning she saw him. Rook appeared down the road, moving slow but sure. His long coat dusted with red earth. His braid half undone. A streak of dried blood down his arm. Not his own, she prayed, but he walked with the calm of a man who had kept his promise. He had survived. Lysa stepped off the porch so fast, she nearly stumbled. "Rook!" He stopped at the sound of her voice. His eyes found her dark as canyon stone, warm as early dusk. Relief softened the strong lines of his face. "You're safe," he said. "Yes," she breathed. "Are you?" He nodded once. "They chased me as far as the ridge, lost my tracks. They won't trouble you again." Tears stung her eyes. She moved toward him slowly, as though afraid he might vanish like a dream at sunrise. "You shouldn't have stayed behind," she said. "I gave my word." His tone was simple, matter of fact, but it carried something deeper than duty. Something that settled quietly into her chest. Without thinking, Lysa reached for his hand. He let her. But the moment didn't survive long. A group of townsmen had gathered across the street, whispering sharply, watching. And among them was Reed Mallon, the same man who'd once served with her husband. Reed Mallon's jaw tightened the moment he saw Rook. "Well, I'll be," Reed called out loud enough for half the street to hear. "Didn't expect to see an Apache strutting through town like he owns the place." Lysa Karen straightened. "He saved us." Reed let out a sharp scoff, or caused the trouble to begin with. Rook's grip tightened faintly around Lysa's hand, not from fear, but from holding himself back. Lysa stepped forward. "Reed Mallon, you'll mind your tongue. If you knew what those men did last night, what they tried to do—" "Save your breath," Reed cut in, waving her off. "You ain't thinking clearly. Running into the hills with Indians. Your husband would be ashamed." The words struck like a slap, but this time, instead of shrinking, Lysa lifted her chin. "My husband was a violent man," she said clearly. People nearby turned startled. Whatever shame he carried is buried with him. Reed blinked, stunned by the sharpness in her voice. "And if you want to know who saved my mother's life," Lysa continued, "you can ask the doctor. But if you want to know who protected this town from those hunters running wild last night," she turned toward Rook, her voice steady, "you can ask him." A silence rippled through the crowd. Slowly, very slowly, their gazes shifted toward Rook. Not with scorn this time, but thought, uneasy consideration, the beginning of understanding. No one argued. Reed stepped back, defeated his authority slipping through his fingers. Rook exhaled, shoulders easing. He glanced at Lysa, gratitude warming his eyes. Something proud there, too, and something softer. She whispered, meant only for him, "You stood for us. It's our turn to stand for you." Later, when the heat faded and long shadows stretched across Silver Mesa, Lysa walked with Rook to the edge of town. Nira and Scylla waited nearby, speaking with two families from the Apache settlement outside the valley. Lysa turned to him. You'll stay close, won't you? I will, he said. If you wish it. She swallowed. I do. Rook hesitated only a moment before reaching into his coat and pulling out a small bracelet, river beads of blue, white, and brown, bound with dried rye grass. He set it gently in her palm, a sign, he said quietly, that there is a place for you, among us. Her breath caught. Her fingers closed around the beads as if they were warm. And there is a place for you, she whispered, in my home, if you want it. Rook's smile was slow, warm, so tender, it nearly took her breath. I will come, he said. And as he walked toward his family, the last streak of sunlight gilding his figure, Lysa knew something had changed forever. Not just for him, not just for her, but for the fragile place where their two worlds finally touched. Hope had taken root, and the valley, long scarred by loss and fear, seemed to draw its first gentle breath toward a kinder tomorrow. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voice-over visual scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.